Well, we have a nice opportunity here. I am here with Stephen Heine to talk about his contribution to this book, Readings of the Gateless Barrier, edited by Jimmy Yu. This is a collection of essays on the Gong'an or the Mumangkan. And Stephen, welcome. It's a pleasure to have an opportunity to talk to you about your contribution to this volume, but maybe hopefully we more generally about koan literature, about Zen, and I thought maybe to get started, you could just say a little bit about yourself and your history of work on Zen and on koan literature in particular, and just give us a way to situate this latest work on that topic from you.
Okay, it's good to see you, Brooke. Thanks very much for being here with the podcast, and thanks for your question. So, yeah, my name is Stephen Heine. I'm professor of Asian Studies and Religious Studies at Florida International University in Miami. And my main field of research is Zen Master Dogen, the founder of the Soto Zen sect in Japan, in medieval Japan, in the 13th century. Dogen was born in 1200 and died in 1253. And in the 1220s, from 1223 to 1227, he spent 4 years investigating Zen Buddhism in China, visiting temples there, gaining his enlightenment there, reading a lot of the Zen writings, especially koan collections in China, and bringing back his transmission of the enlightenment and his understanding of the Zen writings to Japan for the first time, or one of the first people to introduce that in the early 13th century. Zen had been a strong movement in China for a number of centuries, but it didn't really penetrate into and become central to Japanese religion until the 1200s, when Dogen and a few other pilgrims went to China, and after that, that kind of triggered off a big exchange of people and scriptures and religious objects between Chinese and Japanese into the next couple of centuries. So I've always been interested in investigating Dogen's life and thought and the times and what he accomplished in China. And over the years, I began to get more and more interested in the Chinese side, and especially in Chinese koan collections. And I published a book 25 years ago on the so-called Fox koan, which is the second case in our text, The Gateless Barrier. And I also published the book about 10 years ago on the Mu koan. Does the dog have no Buddha nature? The answer is Mu or no, and that is the first koan. So I've been very immersed in this, but I'd like to say that when I was younger and I was a grad student in the 1970s and doing research, I was much more mystified by koans. And I used to tell people I like everything about Zen but the koans, because the koans can be so cryptic, so elusive, so mysterious, and boggle your mind quite a bit. And I tried to kind of stay away from them. But then that black hole brought me into it at some point. And so I very much appreciate, and I very much appreciate, Jimmy, you putting together this book with a lot of great scholars discussing various aspects.
Yeah. Yes, and maybe that's a good cue for us to get in specifically to your essay here. It's titled Testing, Contesting, Besting, Ambiguity in Gong'an Dialogues, Gong'an being the Chinese, that's in Japanese koan. Yeah. And you're especially focusing on, or your starting point is case 31 in the Gong'an, right? This is Zhao Zhou. Yeah. Same protagonist as the Mu or Wu koan, the Buddha nature of the dog, the first case. And it's a very interesting piece. You're focusing on as in your title, ambiguity of this. This is one of these instances where you have a testing or a contest and a very ambiguous result. And then a lot of commentary that seems to exacerbate that. So maybe I'll ask you, there's a lot to talk about this case and some of the connecting cases you bring in, but maybe I'll let you say a little what you were trying to do in this particular essay.
Okay, great. Thank you. So you mentioned a couple of key points. Ambiguity is perhaps the central idea in my essay, and uncertainty is another idea I've used elsewhere in talking about the role of koans. You mentioned the master Jiaozhou, who's known for the Mu koan. Jiaozhou is probably the single most represented master in koan collections. I wanted to briefly comment on Jiaozhou because he's a little bit different from the typical Zen master from the Tang Dynasty that's in the 700-800s primarily, who are the key figures that are talked about in the koan collections, which were not collected until the Song Dynasty in the 11th and 12th centuries when the koan. So there was a gap there of a couple hundred years. And in reflecting back, the Zen editors who started creating these koan collections looked at the different masters and kind of picked out the key features that really symbolized or epitomized their style of teaching. Jiaozhou was known for a softer style of teaching. Some of them, like Linji or Rinzai in Japanese, were known for striking, slapping. Deshan was known for hitting with a stick, and sometimes whether there was corporeal violence or not, the metaphor was that you had to take a teacher had to take a very strong action, and you had to be cruel to be kind kind of approach. Whereas Jiaozhou was much more laid back and kind of used the turn of the phrase, didn't get excited, just made a pun or made a cryptic remark that got the point across. So that's one thing about Jiaozhou's approach that leads to ambiguity, because you're never quite sure where he stands, what he's saying, and what the implication is. For example, a famous case that's also in this collection is the student asked a question, basically, what's the meaning of Zen? And he said, the cypress tree in the courtyard. And he lived in an area where there were a lot of cypress trees. So maybe he's just pointing out ordinary reality. He's pointing out nature. He's saying, look, trees, they're more enlightened than people are because they don't ask so many stupid questions. That's Jiaozhou's style. Now, let me go to the idea of the contest. So the term—
Yes, and Stephen, let me just hit quickly. Jiaozhou in Japanese known as Joshu, and maybe we should tell case 31, just recount that actual koan, that story.
Okay, so in case 31, there's a couple of key elements that show the contest and show the ambiguity, I think. So in case 31, Jiaozhou or Joshu has heard that his followers, some of his disciples, are interested in visiting Mount Wutai. Now, that's a whole major discussion in itself, although it's only mentioned briefly in the case. So Jiaozhou lived in the northerly direction. He lived close to Beijing. And whereas at that time period, most of the Zen activity was in the southern part of China. So that's one thing. And in the northern area, there's a famous Mount Wutai that's known for producing visionary experiences. And you could see the Bodhisattva Manjushri riding in the clouds or appearing on the mountaintop. And it was a very kind of seductive approach to religiosity that was more or less avoided or even forbidden in Zen circles, because Zen didn't want distractions. They didn't want something that seemed supernatural or overly ritualistic, overly mythological. They wanted to take a straightforward approach to meditation. So Zen monks were strongly discouraged from going to Mount Mutai generally. But nevertheless, the koan suggests that they're going. And when they go, they see they kind of lose their way, and they see an older lady, sometimes referred to as a granny, standing on the side of the road, and they ask her, and basically she says, "Go this way." And once they start going, she laughs at them. So Jiao said, "Okay, enough of this. I'll take care of this situation. I'm going to expose the old lady." And he goes, and she tells him to go this way, and he says, "There, I've exposed her." So there's all this ambiguity. What does the old lady mean? What is her relationship to the Zen disciples that are going to the mountain? She seems to outsmart them, outwit them. She seems to one up them. Excuse me. In the contest of testing and besting, she seems to win the day. And then Jiao, as the master, has to kind of defend, support his disciples, and he has to show that he can get the best, and he can settle their differences by showing her up. But what happens in the end is quite unclear. He declares a kind of victory in the contest, but reading the story, it's not totally clear who is the winner and who is the loser, if that is the intention. Or maybe the intention is to leave the ambiguity and try to read between the lines, or force the reader to come up with their own conclusion.
Yeah, and I want to dig into the things you bring up in the essay, like the status of these grannies as sort of outside the monastic institution, and this sort of tension between Utaishan type of worship and Chan or Zen practice, as sort of a background, assumed sort of context for the meaning and the sort of complexification of the meaning here. And I very much like this approach that you've taken, the emphasis. You do stress in your essay, you're not suggesting ambiguity or irresolvability as sort of universally applicable to the koans, but that there's quite a few cases where, particularly as we get into the commentarial tradition, which tends to take every seeming solid conclusion and then twist it or overturn it or spin it some way, that this is a theme that we should maybe attend to as sort of the point in many cases, right? Or something that is being transmitted. I wanted to sort of pursue. I've always found these cases, these kanpo kind of things, these examine, testing. There I've tested, right? And you raise, I think it's 11 is another one in the Umengwan.
Case 11, yeah.
Yeah, with Zhao, and he meets these two hermits, and he says, "Do you have it? Do you have it?" To the first one, and he raises a fist, and then he goes, "This shallow water."
Yeah.
Goes further down the road, I raise it, same question, same answer, and he says, "This is a sword that can kill or give life," or something.
Yeah.
Right. And so of course the commentary wants to pose this as one of these irresolvable questions, right? That's one way. Sometimes Gong'an or koans are interpreted as throwing you into an irresolvable situation that no sort of calculation can resolve, but requiring you to make a move, right? Requiring to without reflection, right? I mean, this is especially, I think, in the Linji or Rinzai tradition. There's kind of this, true man of no fixed position, right?
Yeah.
Well, what is it? And then Linji comes down and says, tell me. And the guy hesitates. And whenever you hesitate, he goes, what a piece of shit.
Right.
Right. And there's a lot of layers to that. But so in this particular case, I was thinking as I was reading your article and going back and looking at the case, I mean, it's not clear to me because what the old lady actually says is something like, suddenly go directly. She literally, it's like mu zhi qu or something like this, right? And that it strikes me that zhi that word meaning directly, go straight ahead. I mean,
Go straight ahead. Yeah.
it's ambiguous, right? It's sort
Yeah.
of, she's a road. They're asking road directions. How do I get to Utai? And she says, go straight ahead,
Yeah.
without hesitating. Suddenly,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I kind of was. I wonder what you would think of this. Could you take that as sort of like, the old joke about how do I get to Carnegie Hall,
Huh.
right?
Go ahead. What's
And
the
the punchline is practice, practice, practice. That's
okay?
how I get to. Okay, so it's the same kind of pun, right? It would be like, how do I get there? The intention was to say, oh, you go down Fifth Avenue or whatever, right? But
Yeah.
how do I get to,
Right.
right? So if the question is how do I get to Utaishan, and she says just go straight without hesitating, right?
Right. Right.
That phrase, it's in the Platform Sutra, right? Dao Chang, 直心是道场, I think he says, which
Mm,
means
mm,
the direct mind. It comes from the
mhm,
Vimalakirti Sutra.
mhm.
Is the Bodhi Mandala, right?
Yeah.
Is the place of awakening. So I've always read that one as I mean, it sort of even exacerbates your point about ambiguity. I would say it
Hmm.
actually,
Yeah.
increases it, because then the story is something like this: how do I get to Mount Utai? Just go directly. The guy then takes 3 steps straight. In other words, he misinterprets her as meaning,
Yeah.
oh, physically going to Mount Utai by
Physically
right
going.
down
Yeah.
this road. And then she
Yeah.
says, oh, another idiot monk.
Yeah.
And then I don't know, it's not clear to me looking at the case that when Zhao Zhou goes to test her, and she said it just says the same question, the same answer.
Yeah.
But Zhao Zhou does not go down the road 5 steps. He
Right.
goes back to the monastery, right?
Right. Yeah.
So you could interpret that as, and then he says, as you report, he says, there, I've totally,
Yeah.
exposed is how you
Right.
translate. So I've totally exposed her. So when I think about the Gong, I don't know if you agree, but I mean, often they're less ambiguous in the original records of recorded
Mm,
sayings, and when they're
mm.
drawn out of context, their ambiguity is sort of deliberately exacerbated. A good
Right.
example is the Zhao Zhou dog Buddha nature one, right?
Yeah.
Because we know that Zhao Zhou actually answered that question in both ways.
Both yes and no. Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
you take one and you leave out the other, suddenly it becomes a lot more
Right.
mysterious what's going on,
That's
right?
true. Yeah.
So
So
I wonder if, like, in its original context, this could have been a simple story saying, like, okay,
right.
how did I show him? Zhao Zhou did not do the stupid thing of taking her literally. He did the direct, unhesitating thing, which was go right back, forget about Wu Taishan, which goes along with, your point about the tension between
Yeah.
Wu Tai worship and
Yeah.
Chan practice. He goes right back to the monastery, and so it's relatively simple. But then you get to the commentary, right? And this is the next thing I want to ask you about, because one thing I really like about your article is you're comparing different koan collections from
Yeah.
different traditions, actually, right?
Yeah.
Different Chan
Yeah.
houses. So we have the Umengguan, which is a Rinzai school sort of thing. It's
Yeah.
very brief, it's very cutting, and in this case too, it's like, and in number 11 that we just talked about, it's like, if you think there's no difference, you're wrong. If you think there is a difference, you're also wrong, right? There's that kind of really pushing the button of that. But then you have a very different approach. You talk about the Book of Serenity, the Conglong Lu Wan Song, which is a
Yeah.
Taodong text,
Yeah.
Soto, later Soto. And
Yeah.
so I'm very curious about that. I mean, I'll let you talk about that a little, but you draw this comparison between the styles, and sort of, I wonder what your reflections are on sort of the different approaches to koan.
Right.
And you also bring up Dogen's, who is also obviously in the Soto tradition. I'm very curious, do you see Dogen's approach as somehow resonating more closely with Wan Song's approach, since they're in the same tradition, or how would you?
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you. Yeah. A lot of interesting points. Let me come back to that one in a moment, which is to compare Dogen and the various schools, the style of interpretation. Let me go back to a point you made a few minutes earlier, which was Wu Taishan, the old lady, the hermits, So there's all this irregularity. I mean, Zen is known as the special transmission outside the teaching, right? And so they've declared they're independent from the mainstream institutional structure, and that got them some rewards and some challenges because the kind of the mainstream institution wants to keep Zen in line, so to speak. And why do you get to change the rules or establish your own rules? But Zen itself, as it succeeds and becomes an institution, finds that there are outliers, there are disruptive types of experiences or people that are challenging or threatening it as well. So does this old lady outsmart the monks? Well, it seems like she does. Does Zhao defeat her? Well, yeah, you could interpret it that he does because he doesn't give in to her misleading directions. But did he really answer her question? If she's saying like, well, show me, show me what you are, show me the person you are. Maybe he just ran away and fled. Maybe he didn't defeat her. And we don't know the result. Like, is she going to leave and say, oh, I'm not going to mislead monks anymore? She may just laugh it off and do the same, the same trickery that, trickster type activity that she did. So that's I think that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, yes, there's a difference between the original and dialogues, sometimes called encounter dialogues, where the contest takes place, and what the commentary turns them into. And now the commentators will frequently turn it upside down. So you can read the koan. It sounds like, well, this master really established the truth, and his disciple or his rival, is received put down and zinger after zinger, and he's not good. And then the commentary may say, well, I'm going to give that so-called master 30 blows of the stick because he didn't understand anything. And if I had been there, I would have done it completely differently. So that's what makes it so fascinating. You're never going to stand on any solid ground. Any conclusion can be turned upside down at any time. And then you can have multiple layers of turning it upside down, where another commentator will come along, maybe a generation later, maybe a different school of thought, and say, well, none of them got it right. Or I think they all got it right, but still, if I had, if you leave it up to me, it would have been done differently. So that's a big tradition to transmit to Japan in the few decades that Dogen had as a teacher in Japan. And then, of course, it was reinforced by many other great teachers in Japan in those years. But I think what Dogen is doing is he's inheriting the koans from both the main, Rinzai and Soto schools, or the Linji and Saodong schools in China, and trying to kind of condense it and coalesce it and bring it into something that he can impart while getting across the idea that there's no fixed position. I think that's the main thing on the ambiguity. Now, in terms of the schools of thought, rather than looking, I mean, one way, of course, is, and a good way to look at it is, Rinzai versus Soto. Those are the two main schools, the two main styles, and they're somewhat different. But on the other hand, another way to look at it is the literary approach. So the Wumongguan or Mumongkan takes a very minimalistic approach to literature. It's a Rinzai school, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all Rinzai monks do it that way either, because some of them wrote very voluminous, extensive commentary. So the Gateless Barrier commentary is like, let's get to the point. Now, that doesn't mean there's a clear-cut answer either, but it may still be ambiguous. But let's get to the heart of it. Like you said, direct. What is the direct? The directness. Directness is not a physical location. Directness is a state of mind that you have to embody. If you embody it, then yeah, you're the winner. If not, if you fall short, then you're not. But then there's the voluminous, extensive type of commentary where you keep turning it upside down and back and forth, and praising it and criticizing it at the same time. And I think in both the Rinzai and Soto schools, you see both examples of that. And within Dogen himself, he tends to be very verbose and sometimes and gives multiple implications. But there are other times where he does the more minimalistic, direct, pragmatic path.
Yeah. I mean, I found it really fascinating. You when you go through, and I mean, we can talk about the the Blue Cliff record as well as a third sort of
Yeah.
approach, right? The B and Lu. But when you were talking about the Book of Serenity, the Songrong Lu, I thought that you quote a late commentary, sub-commentary, commentary on a commentary from this nun, right?
Yeah.
Say,
Val.
what's her name? Yeah, Boucher or something like this, right?
Yeah.
And and I thought that sort of epitomized to me sort of the different ways we were presenting this problem, the ambiguity, as you say, in that when you have commentary and then a generation later somebody else turns it over and says, now you've involved me as well, and if I were there, I would have fed them both to a hungry dog or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Right? And it does seem to me Dogen's writings are like that, even internal dialogue with himself, right? When he's commenting on a case, he'll give you sort of a reflection on it, and then he'll reverse it, and it'll go in the opposite direction, right? And so this line that you quote, "Let's sit leisurely on top of the mountain peak and watch as one falls and the other rises." I mean, that is a sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I understand your take on that is that sort of we're watching, these varying judgments at varying times come and go, winning and losing, who's on top, who's not, where it flips, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
if sort of almost mindful watching of these various viewpoints coming forth and disappearing, right? So
Yeah.
there's a kind of quieter, more detached position behind that sort of is allowing all these different voices, right?
Hmm.
Whereas
Yeah.
in the Woman Guan, as you say, it's very direct, it's very short, it's always like, quick, make a decision, right? It's don't overthink this, and even
Yeah.
don't even look left or right, kind of, right? Again, it is that kind of go straight forward, that
Yeah.
kind of thing. Because, right, I mean, as I understand the sort of approach going back to Mazu but especially in Linji and forward Rinzai, I mean, let's go back to the true man of no fixed position, right? You have this idea, here's this thing, your Buddha nature, right? The truth, blah, blah, blah. It's so awesome. It's everywhere. It's going in and out of your head. Now, show it to me. And of course, if you think about, okay, so let me put together my Buddhist doctrine, or what did he say
Yeah.
earlier, or what, right? If anything you're doing like that is mediated and is, you were just saying no fixed position, non-abiding, right, would mean you
Yeah.
really can't connect any two things. You just, boom, whatever comes out, right? And so
Right.
whenever they put you on the spot like that, when Linji, the guy says, what is this true man in no fixed position? He comes down, he grabs the guy, and he says, speak, speak, meaning it's
Right.
you, but it's not. But the key moment there for me is that the monk hesitates, and then he throws him away. Hesitates means, he's deliberating, right? He's
Yeah.
pairing, right? And that means
He doesn't have the truth because he would have uttered
yeah,
something
yeah.
spontaneous.
And whatever came out would have been it, right?
Yeah.
If once
Yeah.
it was, right? So you don't need to look at a bunch of different things over and over. It's more. I mean, I'm just sort of asking for your comment on that. It seems like there is a sense in the way you've depicted it in the article that for me as a reader, it does kind of confirm my sense of how. I don't want to say Soto, but Caodong. As you say, there's a gentler approach in Dongshan, Tozan, and in Caodong, right? They
Yeah.
never hit anybody. You never see Dongshan hit anybody or shout at anybody, right?
Right.
And this Zhao Zhou is sort of in the middle, but he's more on that side, I would say, as
Right.
you were
Yeah.
just pointing out. So it's interesting to think about how those different approaches to Zen teaching and practice would take shape as literary genres, as literary approaches in the different
Right.
schools.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm reminded of this to make a joke here. I'm reminded of a TV ad, I think back in the 70s or 80s for aftershave lotion, where this tough guy's sitting in a bar drinking whiskey, and the bartender comes up to him and slaps him. And apparently he's got some of the aftershave on his hand, and he slaps him. And this tough guy says, I needed that. And
Oh
it
yeah,
was like you got awakened to like your true understanding of what your appearance was, which was faulty, and
yeah,
the bartender is being the Zen master there and slapping him. That's the Rinzai approach. So a lot of the stories demands this question, and as soon as they say, as soon as the disciple opens his mouth, before he gets any of the words out, as soon as he opens his mouth, he's already going to be slapped by Linji because he can read it. He can read the body language. He can just tell the words are secondary. But the verbal um, expression may be secondary to the gesture,
yeah,
to the motion. So that's we can write that back to case 11, case 31 with the woman on Mount Wutai. But 11 is where Zhao sees the two hermits. They both raise their fists. One has the answer according to him, the other doesn't. Now, is he joking when he does that, or did he see something special in the look on their face? That's and so ambiguity refers to like you bring up Boucher, meaning hey, it's a much later generation. I think that was 1700s, and then also it's kind of taking this mountaintop viewpoint, bird's eye view. Like, let's look at it from a distance, and from a distance, we can see strengths and weaknesses in all the positions. Has anybody extricated themselves from the entanglement that they've gotten into? According to that view, nobody has. I think that as the reader. I mean, in the tradition, we assume that the tradition is telling us, hey, these were stories that were demanded of you. Your response to understanding the story is demanded of you, just in the same way that the encounter dialogue was created. So the encounter dialogue was in the 700s, 800s, but now in the 11 1200s, when this tradition is flourishing in China and Japan, and also goes to Korea, you have to produce just the same way. That's the doksan. That's going into the master's inner circle and being tested one-on-one. And then one way to interpret it is that here we are in the 21st century, and we're casual readers of a book about the tradition, but we're being demanded in the same way that we have to come up with our own.
yeah. I mean, and sort of in a way, the way the Guan is written, that very brief, very sudden, these very compressed little verses that you get. Sometimes they're three character, almost nursery rhyme
Right.
kind of verses, and his very brief comments, right? I mean, especially if you understand that this is in the context and against the backdrop of these very elaborate commentaries, right? So
Hmm.
you already had the Blue Cliff record, which has
Right.
much more, robust sort of,
Yeah.
often you'll get even sort of the straight Buddhist analysis first, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I love these things in Chan commentary. Sometimes you'll have like a 5-part commentary where it'll be like, here's the thing. Like there's a very nice, I think it's a Yuan Dynasty commentary on the Xin Xinming, the faith in mind verse
Right.
attributed to the third patriarch, and it's like it starts out. There's a thing like that kind of sort of like Yuan Wu's Engel's thing in the Blue Cliff record, right at the beginning. He has 6 plus 6 equals 12, and a bunch of this kind of stuff. Now look at this, right?
Yeah.
It has that, then it has the verse, like 2-line couplet, and then it has like this very straight Buddhist analysis. Okay, emptiness and da 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 da, all that stuff. And
Yeah.
then it has a refutation of that, right?
Hmm.
It's like a P,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
it has like a counter verse to the original
Right.
one of the
Right.
text, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's all this doing and undoing, but it's very literary and very intertextual, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
not. So there's you go through the conceptual thinking and then you kind of cross it out. But
Yeah.
Uman is not doing that at all, right? I mean, in a way,
Right.
don't you think? I don't know. He's presupposing that his readers or the students of Chan who encounter
Yeah.
this text are used to that way, right? And it's
Right.
almost like a way of recreating the slap or the
Right.
shout as
Right.
a literary form, just
Yeah.
as a literary masterpiece in a way of brevity and shock treatment.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think a key word you're using is presupposing. I think there's a
Yeah,
lot of presupposing that gets lost to us. So, um, uh, 1,000 years ago, close to 1,000 years ago, um, the people studying this would have known all these stories, all these
right.
interpretations back and forth. So it makes it hard for them to come up with something new and innovative because, it's all been exhausted seemingly,
Yeah,
but they would have known it. So you just get to the core of it. Whereas in today, for relying on what gets translated, and I've tried to explain people. One time somebody said to me, "Oh, all the great koan collections have been translated."
yeah,
And like you brought up an obscure commentary, and there's, I said no, maybe 1% has, or part of
yeah,
1% has been. I mean, it's such a vast literature,
yeah,
and it's not like they knew all of it, but they knew quite a bit more than we do. So we see this one glimmer of light here, and then
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It's not only that, it's, I mean, an interesting thing is you were mentioning before, these are, allegedly stories from the Tang Dynasty, which are being written in the Song Dynasty, and then are further being transmitted into to Japan. Centuries have gone by. By the time of
yeah,
Dogen, it's the 13th century, right? So it's like as far back as what for us, right? That would be like, you
yeah,
know,
early medieval,
yeah, like Chaucer or
before
something.
Shakespeare,
Yeah,
Chaucer. Yeah,
that's
I
right.
often compare it to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, and there are these, just like the thing we were talking about before about taking these things out of context deliberately. I mean, this
yeah,
is the genius of Chan literature in a way. They're already doing that deliberately to
yeah.
spin those things. But even when they're compiling these things, okay, I mean, tell me if this rings true to you. You are an expert in this literature, probably more familiar with some of these things. But I think it's another Zhao Zhou one, right? Which is, it's the same question always, right? In one form or another, what is the meaning of Bodhidharma coming from the West?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the it's ma sanjin, so that's 3 pounds of hemp.
Yeah.
That one. It's in the Umenguan too, right? It's
Yes, and it's in the Bienlo, the
that's
blue
in
clipper.
right.
Yeah.
So someone and I can't remember. Maybe you know better than me. Did research on this and found that this was the weight and the material of a monk's robe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah.
it's still a funny, mysterious thing to say in an encounter dialogue, which is to say, what is to translate it into very, very flat-footed prose, you would say something like, what is Buddhism all about? It's about the feeling of, from my first person perspective, subjectively, of the immediate touch of my
Yeah.
right now, the weight of my garment on my body, right?
Yeah. Right. Because he's saying the hemp or the flax, it's like the material that it's made of,
That's
and
right.
which could be rough, could be coarse. It's not silk, right?
Yeah,
I mean, they had silk robes. That's a whole other,
yes.
um,
But,
but
it's a direct way of saying. I mean,
yeah,
it's still mysterious in a way, and it still gets right to the point of your own mind, just this mind, ordinary mind is Buddha, and that kind of thing. But as you go through centuries, right?
yeah,
And then you go to Korea and you go to Japan, you go to America, 3 pounds of hemp. What is the meaning
yeah.
of Buddhism? 3 pounds of hemp, right? It's taken as this sort of
Total
pure
absurdity.
absurdity, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it is in a different way, right? But
Yeah.
intertextually, it's functioning differently as a literary device, right?
On the other hand, if you look at the Blue Cliff Record commentary, and that's one of the, multi-leveled ones that, give different,
Yeah,
sometimes it sounds very straightforward and like traditional Buddhistic, and then other times it's wild and contradictory and paradoxical.
yeah,
But for that case, and for most other cases, what he'll do is start out and say like, a lot of people think that this refers to the
hmm
material made for the typical Buddha.
yes,
Wrong.
Yeah, yeah,
A
yeah.
lot of people, and he'll go through like
Yeah,
5 or 6 and just say, those are all wrong. Like, shame on you for
yeah.
thinking.
Totally, totally.
But,
And I mean that's such a brilliant move because
yeah,
the whole point of saying, I mean, here I will be a more traditional Buddhist scholar maybe on this, but
yeah,
the point of saying 3 pounds of hemp is to say whatever you're experiencing at this moment. Of course, not specifically 3 pounds of hemp, right? Or
yeah,
he answered it like that because that's exactly what the experience of that second was. But if you go to your commentary, this actually pertains to the hermit's case too, and you repeat that, right? And say, oh, well, what it means is the robe of a monk. Well, you're not a
yeah,
monk wearing that robe right now, right? So
right,
it should
right.
now mean something else.
Yeah,
Again, the meaning is not fixed, right? So,
yeah.
so, so
Well, let
in
me bring up also, let me, because there's um, the 3 pounds of flax. There's another one that's quite similar, where Jiao says the 7 pound shirt. So now that one
yeah, 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 yeah.
makes less,
You
you
mean
know,
that one's weirder, right? Because he says when
weird.
I
Yeah,
was in such and Jingzhou or someplace,
yeah,
I had
Jingzhou.
a robe made and it weighed 7 pounds, right? Something
Yeah,
like that.
right. Which
Yeah,
which probably it didn't. Probably that doesn't couldn't exist. So that one, and then also in the poem that comments on it in the Blue Cliff Record,
yeah,
uh, the that commentator pretty much says, I'm sick of thinking about that shirt. I'm going to just dump it into the lake.
yeah,
And then he said, who can ever understand the shirt or why I dumped it into the lake?
mm, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So so yeah,
Yeah, no, that's like another. I mean, there's a good question there, and I don't
yeah,
think we have an answer, which is there like just like you've identified this kind of genre of granny koans, right? Is
yeah,
there a genre of robe or
right,
I mean there's a bunch of robe ones. There's the Yunmen one, right, which says the world is such a wide world. Why do you at the sound of a bell, why do you come and put on your robes, right?
right,
All these
right.
things about monastic life that are kind of
Yes,
signal,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, I
And so
think a
there's
lot
that
on.
one, there's the
Oh,
three
oh,
pounds of hemp, and then there's the
yeah,
one you mentioned, which is even another layer of complexity, right?
yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Because
yeah. I mean, Yun Man's another interesting character because he lives in between the
mm,
Tang Dynasty and the Song Dynasty, so it's a little bit later generation. But
yeah,
he also has he also talks a lot about the simple factual things that are right in front of you. Jiao has the one about the breakfast, wash
yeah,
your breakfast dishes.
yeah,
Um, the bowls. The staff is another one that they talk about quite a bit.
right, right,
So the Zen monks weren't supposed to have too many possessions, right? I mean, ideally they had. What did they have? They had a robe. They had a staff. They had a walking staff. They had their eating bowls, their baking bowls, and they read the scrolls, the sutras written on the scrolls, and so those do enter into a lot of it. I talk about the one with with the sutra scrolls a little bit, where a um, which also involves Jiaozhou, because a female donor, now this is not a granny, but it's another
yeah,
non-monastic who's,
yes,
outside the system, says, and this would be a typical request from a donor, recite the sutras for me, and you would think that the monk would go into a kind of semi-trance state and recite from memory. Jiaozhou gets up and walks around his seat, and he and acts like that was it. And she said, "Only you only did half of it. I wanted the whole thing." And so she kind of gets the last word. I think the last word was recommended once by Junan, who I believe he is in this collection, right? And edited by Jimmy Yu. He had a great essay
yeah,
some years ago called "The Last Word of Chan." I think that kind of epitomizes. But from what we're saying, there is no last word because that can be overturned.
right, right, right. Actually, if you don't mind, could you have a nice discussion of that case and then Dogen's
Right.
next comment on that? Can you just walk us through that so that recitation of the sutra and the circumambulation, and then that again, you emphasize these sort of outside the system people, which I think is a very interesting.
Well, yes. I mean, one thing about Dogen has a chapter in his main writing, the Shobogenzo, called Kankin, which is usually translated as reading the sutra, but the word kan doesn't actually mean reading. It means kind of look at, and it implies reciting. So sometimes they make a joke like the monks did, according to these traditions, they did everything but read it. They recited it. They rotated it. They remembered it. They would copy it or write it. And in that chapter, Dogen gives this very straightforward description from the Manual of Zen Instructions that was written in China in 1103 on, like, if a donor asks, what do? Okay, you get out the scrolls, you burn the incense, you put flowers on display, you do all these things to please the donor, and then he lists the case that we just mentioned and about 10 other examples where it all slaps the sutras right in the face and says, like, don't read them. It's ridiculous to do that. Nobody really wants you to. The donors even don't even want to bother to spend the time to hear that. They want to get to the point. Do you understand the heart of the sutra? I mean, Dogen's writing is in Japanese Shobogenzo. The phrase was also used by some Chinese Zen people, and it basically means, who has the true Dharma eye? Where is the treasury of the Dharma is in the eye of the master, like the insight of the master, and that captures the flavor that if what the master says prevails over all the deceptions and illusions.
Right. And but what does he say about that case? He says she says you've only recited half of the sutra, and he sort of flips that to you've only it's half of a circumambulation, or
Yeah, I can't quite remember, to be honest, Dogen's move on that one right now, but that's a typical thing for Dogen to say,
yeah.
like, he one time he said,
Well, I'll read what you wrote. You
okay,
translate from him. Zhao Zhou going around the meditation seat going around Zhao Zhou,
oh,
Zhao
right, yeah,
Zhou going around Zhao Zhou, and the
right,
meditation
yeah,
seat going around
exactly,
the
yeah,
meditation
yeah,
seat.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that is so typical a Dogen move, right? That's
yeah,
like
yeah,
saying, obstruction obstructs obstruction, or today flows into today,
yeah.
in Uji, and that
But
life and death.
one of my favorite lines in Dogen that would apply here is he says, a half truth fully known.
Yes,
Wait, a full truth half
half
known
known.
is a half truth fully
Right,
known.
right.
So
And he
in the
says the
end,
same
because
thing. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
well, the
Yeah,
entanglement, the delusion, the self-deception itself becomes a trigger to
right,
get out of self-deception. Yeah.
right. Yeah, and he uses that same thing also about moments in time, right? In Uchi, right? He'll
Yes.
say like,
Yeah.
right, all of the
Yeah.
time being half experienced is half of the time being all experienced,
Yeah.
completely things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah. I mean, so I mean that's a huge. We probably don't have time to get into the. I mean, you began as really as you said at the beginning. Dogen was your main sort of central point of research interest and maybe
Yeah.
personal interest. I think your first book was on Dogen and Heidegger, right? On time,
Yeah. Dogen and Heidegger on time. Yeah.
right? So, and that was your dissertation, was it?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but at that time, you weren't really dealing with Dogen's. I mean, you weren't mainly focused on Dogen's handling of the koan literature. Is that
Right. And though, because at the time, again, I didn't like the, I thought,
yeah,
leave me out of it. But then, a few years later, I wrote the book Dogen and the Koan Tradition, and that was interesting for me. But also, we've been talking about how the tradition changes and it kind of gets rigidified at some points of it, and it's got to be reinvigorated. So we know that Dogen had a collection of 300 koan cases. That was separate from the Shobogenzo, but in the Shobogenzo, he comments on several hundred koan cases, and then in other of his writings and sermons and lectures, he's frequently talking about koan. So he knew it back and forth and was introducing it. But in in the Shogun period, in the Edo period in Japan, like in the 1700s, the government said, we have Rinzai Zen and Soto Zen. Like, why do we need two different Zens? Like, tell us what you're about. Show us your direct path. And so it came out that Rinzai said, "Hey, we're for koans," and Soto said, "We're for Zazen meditation primarily." And so it became kind of taboo within Soto Zen to say that Dogen talked about koans. Until the second half of the 20th century, no Soto commentator would really touch that subject.
Right. Right, but I mean, he talks extensively about koans. They're all
He
over
talks,
the place. I mean,
yeah,
you can call them koans, or anyway. He does exactly what the koan collections do, which
yeah,
is
yeah.
take little
Take a
dialogue,
dialogue
yeah, and
and
then
then
riff the hell out of it, right?
yeah, and what?
And riff the hell out of it,
Riff
right?
the hell out of it. Okay, yes, good way
But
to put it.
but but the question is, I mean, in terms of this is a little off point, but I'm just curious to talk to you as a Dogen expert. I mean,
Yeah,
do you? So it's clear that all the traditions are deeply engrossed in what we now call koan literature in some form or
yeah,
another. But
yeah,
this sort of system, like there's Huato
yeah,
practice, for example, or
yeah.
the way Hakuin uses koans as sort of this program, this sort of Chan Gong'an thing.
Right. Yeah.
That's not going on in Soto, right?
No, no.
So
Right.
what is the role? It's you have like shikantaza on the one hand, and then you have kind of a dharma talk back and forth. Is that how you would picture what was going on with
Yeah,
Dogen?
that's a good way to put it. I mean, I think it's complicated because partly of that Edo period
Yeah,
discussion, but even before then, there was a difference in style. There's no question. Um, Now, the Rinzai Zen is known for Wato, which is you pick the key word or the key phrase. So
yeah.
in the dog of Buddha nature, mu. So you pick that one word, or it could be, or the 3 pounds of flax, and then you forget about the rest of it and you focus on that. That's one style. What I call Dogen style, as opposed to Wato, and to keep the kind of rhyme here, Kato. Kato means entanglements.
Ah, yes, yes.
And he frequently says you disentangle entanglements through entanglements. And
Mm,
that's the riffing the hell out of it, and
yeah,
to
yeah,
turn it inside out and upside down, and go into
yeah,
the rabbit hole, go into the black hole, and try to come back from the deepest level of the black hole.
yes.
And so I think that's what I see as Dogen style. That's not necessarily the Soto tradition in Japan, which has its own vagaries, and sometimes I think they're intimidated. Hey, we can never keep up with what Dogen did, so let's not try to imitate him. Let's take it in a somewhat different direction.
Right, right, right. Yeah, that's a great phrase. Yes, the Dogen is sort of entanglement Zen.
Yeah,
It's let's get even more entangled, so entangled that the tangles disentangle. Right.
yeah. That's why he says,
Yeah,
Jojo walks around the seat walks around Jojo.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So not, but in your understandings, is that that's not what he thinks you're thinking about during so-called zazen or shikantaza, or is it? In other words, there's all this incredible wordplay and verbiage and
yeah,
thinking,
yeah.
and then there's this so-called just sitting, right? Shikantaza
Right. Yeah,
practice.
so-called just sitting. Right. So
Yes,
I think in Rinzai, there tends to be more emphasis on, like, when you're sitting, you're
yes,
sitting with the koan.
right.
All right.
That's not going on with
And
Dogen.
then you're going to have to pass the stage. That's what Hakuin talked about. You try to pass it. So, the famous Japanese philosopher Nishida Kitaro,
Yeah.
he mainly wrote more philosophical works, but he did talk a lot about Zen in his works, and he did talk about Dogen to some extent. But when he was a young man, they say that he was practicing at a temple. I think he was like 19, but before he knew he'd become such a famous philosopher, and he was trying to pass the Mu koan, and he couldn't do it. And he said his roommate had passed it, and he said to the roommate, like, "How did it go today?" And the roommate didn't want to make fun of Nishida, so the roommate didn't tell him he had passed it. But he said he could see by the way he was talking that he had passed it, and he was so jealous, and he kind of gave up on it because it's a tough path. Now, there is a branch of modern Soto, and some of the American Zen teachers have been associated with this. Mayazumi, the teacher Mayazumi Roshi, who had the Zen Center in Los Angeles for many years, did try to integrate. He came from a tradition where they did try to integrate the Blue Cliff Record, the Mumon Kan, and various koan collections into it, and have a curriculum of several hundred koans. So it was closer to the Rinzai spirit. So you do find that in some wings. But if we go back to Dogen himself, I mean, you're right. Look, Dogen, even though he's known for just sitting, shikantaza, he doesn't say that much about it. I mean, there's a few manuals, but they're only a couple pages each.
Yeah.
He's cross your legs, sit still,
Yes.
keep your back upright. That's, but then he'll say things like, well, what is the truth? He says, well, the nose is vertical, the eyes are horizontal. Now that comes out of doing Zazen, but that's just like the 3 pounds of flax. Like, well, what do you mean by that? So, but I don't think he personally endorsed, he had that fusion of like, you're sitting because you're going to be thinking about the koan.
Yeah, I see. Oh, you think Dogen in the sitting you are thinking about?
No, I think he did not embrace that. Yeah,
that's right.
So then they get kind of disconnected even further as the tradition goes on. Well, when you're sitting, you're just sitting. I mean, you're not thinking. Now they will give people advice. If you talk to a teacher and you have some problem you're dealing with, they would say, like, sit with that problem. That could be a typical thing. But in the koan tradition, it's a little bit disconnected.
Right. We're maybe getting close to running out of time here. I was going to ask you another literary question, but maybe it goes too far afield, because I was thinking about Dogen style, the style of the Umanguan, koan literature as a literary genre. And, one thing that, we just had a conference here this week on Tendai, and Jackie Stone was here.
Okay.
I'm teaching her book right now, and one of the things that comes up in there is the Hongaku Shiso.
Yeah.
And, some of the Kuden literature, medieval Japanese Kuden, right? And Kochuan literature. So that's oral transmission, right? And the way they use the Guanxin, Kanxin method, right? And it seems to me like both this kind of, which is a Tiantai method, one of the 4 methods of exegesis.
Right.
So you have a development that, you might trace to that, because that's where Juri gets like can make anything a metaphor for anything, basically, right?
Okay.
In his commentaries. But he's not going way out into the wild so much. But when you get to the Chan literature, in the koan literature in China, right, you start to see this. And at the same time, maybe in this medieval Tendai literature in Japan, which then feeds into, it does have some similarity to me as a kind of outsider to the Japanese side of things, with the way Dogen handles the text, reversal, the way he will, and Jackie Stone points this out too, all sentient beings have the Buddha nature, becomes all sentient beings, that is all existence, is the Buddha nature, that kind of wordplay. I'm interested in that in the koan collection too, on the other side, right, where they are. I think Bob Sharf has written about this, maybe in this collection too. that there's some punning going on, and some of these weird twists also can track that way. It's such fascinating material. There's so many dimensions at once.
Yeah.
Which this is a good way to maybe try to wrap up. This is why this book is very fascinating and timely addition to the literature, may I say.
That's right. It adds many different perspectives and different approaches of authors and taking in different directions in Chan and Zen and Buddhist traditions. So just to comment briefly from Dogen's standpoint, I think so how would you translate? You said. Guanxin.
Yes. Contemplation of mind. I mean,
contemplation of mind. Right.
Just because reading her book just brought to my attention how interesting this is, because Yeah, so Jury uses that term as the main meditation practice.
That's
So it's
right.
basically when he's doing the Lotus Sutra Wenju commentary, he's saying there's four different ways to approach this text. Like one is the story, the narrative, how
Yeah.
this right. So what's going
Yeah.
on? One is how this works in the classification of teaching. So you get sort of
Yeah.
formal doctrinal stuff. One
Yeah.
is this special Lotus Sutra thing, like Hon and Banin Ji, the
Right.
root and the trace, right?
Yeah.
So all the characters have like multiple identities, right? And so he tracks that. And then the last one is Guanxin, which basically means how to read this text as relevant to meditation, to the
Yeah. Yeah.
contemplation of mind. So,
Right.
it'll say Eagle Peak or Vulture Peak, that means the five skandhas, or everything turns out to be about you, the reader, or some
Right.
kind of metaphor
Yeah.
for the body mind of the reader, right?
Okay. Good.
So,
So,
so
so
yeah,
yeah,
and
so that's
it
associated with
gets somewhat wild in places. There's all these
yes.
stretches made
So
to
that's associated with the Tendai school, right?
yeah, yeah,
Which Dogen,
yes,
like other figures from his era, started out as a Tendai monk, in his case, very briefly for a year or two, and then he departed. One
yes,
theory that he thought it was overly systematic and not really getting to the heart of it. On the other hand, I think you're exactly right because when I was writing that book, Dogen and the Koan Tradition, that takes me back over 30 years now, and I was discussing it with a professor in Japan, and I said, what is Dogen really doing? And he said Guanxin. That at some point it's that contemplation or observance, a contemplative observance of the truth that's embedded and that allows you to play all the mind games and word games and control them rather than them controlling you. We go back to Jiao. He has a famous saying: "You either are controlled by the 24 hours of the day, or you
yeah,
control 24 hours of the day." And I think that applies to
absolutely.
to, to the Tendai and the Zen thinkers.
Totally,
Yeah,
totally. Or Huineng saying, right, to
yeah.
turn the Lotus Sutra or be turned by the Lotus.
That's right. You turn it, or you're
Yeah,
turned by it, which is also a saying that Dogen has a chapter discussing.
that's right. He has a whole
Yeah,
fascicle about that
yeah,
one. Yeah.
yeah.
And I just want to say that idea is something, it comes even into Neo-Confucianism, that Lu
Right.
Shangshan says the six classics are a commentary on me. That's the sort
Hmm.
of way this sort of Zen
Hmm.
ethos uh,
Yeah,
plays out in one wing of Confucianism. So
yeah.
yeah, and
Well, I
it's
think
so interesting that it's in terms of commentary, though, right? Who's commentating on whom, or who's
right.
turning whom?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think one kind of final point I'll make is that
yeah,
in the tradition, as you're pointing out, there, a lot of people are competing and carving out their territory in terms of my commentary on this, and then
yeah,
and so many brilliant things have been done by so many of these wise thinkers. That's how do you come along and say something new? I mean, that's
yeah,
always the problem. How do you answer it in a new way? But another brilliant thinker comes along. Dogen comes along, Ha Quinn later, and others, and they invade that territory that others
yeah,
have carved out. They
totally.
pilfer from it in a creative sense, right? Because if you're looking for truth, you don't worry about the sectarian boundaries. And I can't say this because so and so said it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's what makes it such a rich overall
yeah.
tradition.
Totally. That is a good place to stop. I think that
Yeah,
even applies to Jojo and the grannies in a way, right? Who's
yeah.
turning whom, right? It's one of those.
Right. Who's turning whom? Yeah. And and
Okay.
and and it also applies to you and me. I'm not sure yet.
Are you interviewing me or am I interviewing you?
Right. Yeah.
Well, that's a good place to stop, I guess. So
Okay.
thank you, Stephen. I think this was a great conversation. You and I have had many conversations. For some reason, we've never had this conversation about koan,
Yes, it was bound to happen. So
but
thanks to
this was
Jimmy for
good.
bringing us together.
Thanks, Jimmy, for doing the book and
Yeah.
for organizing all of this. And I guess
Right.
we'll stop there.
Okay. Thank
Thanks.
you.